Hello everybody, welcome back to our innovation series. Today I'd like to shine the light on Vari, which is a feature of our Poly API platform. And specifically we're going to be using Vari for feature flags. So this is totally released and supported. There is one gotcha which I'll point out that you should just be careful of, but you're welcome to use this feature today within the product. And specifically what we're going to be doing is we're going to be managing or controlling flow logic of our code using an externalized configuration value that's stored inside the Poly platform. So you can dynamically update variables and manage them using the Poly platform, and they will be used at runtime in your code to control the flow of logic. There's so many different ways you can use this, and there's so many applications of Vari, so I had to kind of distill it down to a simple example to illustrate the concept, which I hope you will be able to apply on your own. So our flow is basically going to do an if statement where it's going to look at the certain value of a Vari entry at this given point in time, and then if it's true, we'll go ahead and call a function, and if it's false, we'll go ahead and skip it. So it'll be really straightforward. The value here is that you can dynamically control the flow of code. Like I said, there's too many use cases here to enumerate, but it could be something like deciding on a per tenant basis if you should invoke an additional function. It could be something that basically looks at like pre-released features and then selectively enables them for certain customers. So there's, like I said, there's a lot of good use cases here. And the innovation here is really how easy we've made it through Vari to access this data that is really representations of configurations. So traditionally configurations were maybe kind of within the application in a file or something along those lines, whereas we've made those configurations data and you can dynamically control it. Now there's plenty of great feature flagging tools out there, so I'm not going to present Poly as if it's kind of unique in that sense. However, when you kind of zoom out and start seeing how many different applications there are for both Poly and Vari, where this is just one of them, hopefully you'll kind of start to appreciate the general purpose design that we've applied here. And our vision really is to kind of make this a little bit more performant. So this is the gotcha that you should be careful of. To make sure it's performant is up to you as the implementer, rather than something that we inherently give you out of the box. So I think we can do a great job here with caching to basically make it so that you don't have to worry about using these configurations at volume. So with that, let's go to VS Code and take a look at how it was implemented, and then let's go ahead and execute this function and see it in action. Okay, so we're in VS Code, and I'll just do a quick walkthrough of the code here so you guys understand what the flow is, and then we'll go ahead and execute it, change some configurations, and execute it again, and we should see different results. So the first thing here is I'm importing both Poly and Vari, which is a submodule of Poly. So you do that with the curly brackets in TypeScript, a little bit different in Python and Java. Then we just have a main function, which is an asynchronous function that takes in a tenant ID or representation as a string. And what this function is going to do is it's going to have an if statement, which basically goes and fetches the variable from Vari. Now, again, if you're doing this at high volume, you're going to be basically hitting the config store pretty hard. So I don't recommend this pattern in high volumes unless you take the result and cache it and maybe manage it on your own. So be careful there. However, if it's low volume, or if you've taken into account performance, or if we're at a future point made this implicitly performant, then yeah, feel free to write code like this and have at it. And then in our case here, our configuration is actually an object, and I'll show that in just a second. So we're just using this notation to kind of dynamically access a subset of that object. You can also use dot notation. However, dot notation forces you to pick which one it is. So not as dynamic. You can have different conditions, like if the tenant 1 is this, then do this. If tenant 2 is this, then do this. And there might be a time that makes more sense because you kind of have to explicitly code tenant-specific behaviors, which Again, not a great practice unless you have to, but you might have to, and in which case this is actually very convenient. But what I'll do is I'll just go ahead and say generically access the tenant ID, and then if that value is true, go ahead and log this statement, call this function, and then log that we've finished. And if it's false or undefined, then it's going to just go ahead and skip to line 10. And this function that we're calling, really dumb function, basically just returns true. So it's just going to say true if it was invoked, and that's it. So with that, let's take a quick look at the actual data that's being stored for this feature flag. So here's our feature flag data that's stored within Poly. You'll see that the value is basically modeled as an object where we say, we have a per tenant configuration. Again, there's so many different ways to do this. There's actually an even higher order pattern to build multi-tenant applications that doesn't take this approach. I'm keeping this as a simple example just to illustrate the point. So in our case here, we have an object. Values can be numbers, strings, booleans, whatever you'd like. You can have a different flag per tenant, but again, then you have much more complicated code. So anyhow, I just went ahead and I said, okay, I've got these two tenants in here, one set to true, one set to false, and that's what we'll use with this variable. Now, one quick note is that this is not a secret, so feature flags kind of implicitly have to not be secrets so that you can use their configuration data in your code. If we were to set it to secret true, then you can't actually access the information in the code. You can only pass it by reference into a Poly function. So just please keep that in mind as something to kind of consider when you're building these. Okay, great. So let's go ahead and execute it. So we'll start by calling tenant1. Before that, we'll just do ts node demo.ts. And so here, tenant1, if you remember, is set to true. So we should actually see it execute this function. And we could see it executed the function, and then it finished the execution. Now let's try tenant2. This one, based on the configuration, should skip executing the function. And then let's try tenant3, which we haven't even defined, just so you can see that there is actually an implicit base behavior in this configuration. But again, that's up to you as a developer to take into account. So we could see also skipped it. Now let's go back to Postman. Let's flip those flags and let's see the results change. So here, I'm going to go ahead and flip this one to false, and I'm going to flip this one to true. And then we're just going to patch it. In the future, there's going to be a UI to manage all these things. In this case, I just manage it using Postman. So you can see we've flipped these values. So let's go back to VS Code and execute it again. So here we are. Now let's go ahead and execute tenant1, and it should skip it this time. And then if we do tenant2, it should hit and print true. And then if we do tenant3, which is still undefined, it should skip it again. Great. So behaving as expected. So with that, thank you very much. Hopefully it made sense how you can use Vari to kind of retrieve dynamically external config data. You can use that as feature flags. I'll be doing many more videos on Vari in the future on how you can apply this feature. Like I said, just one application of many, and hopefully you enjoy this video. And as always, if you have any feedback or comments or questions, please feel free to reach out. Thank you very much.